you so much for joining us today. Sean O'Connor here from Macabre Daily, and I am so excited. I'm especially even more excited because Alisa and I just found out that we are disaster movie lovers, specifically disaster movies of the 70s, specifically the Poseidon Adventure. And when you find your people, it just makes, all of a sudden, the world gets a different glow. So we have Alisa Kwitney with us, who, I mean, I don't know where to start, Alisa. We're going to talk about Howl, your new collaboration with Mauricet. I have that name correct, right?
Actually, I mispronounced. So Mauricet is he's
Mauricet.
Belgian and speaks
I
French.
gotta go soft
And
T.
for years I was calling him Mauricet because in to his face I call him Alain, which is his name. And then I discovered that I had been saying it wrong.
How many years was this before he correct?
We don't
All right. Now, I was just telling Alisa that she has to bear with me because I have to go over your accolades because it factors in heavily to Howl, and I'll explain why. So let's start with you first. So you're the former DC Comics staff editor, which is like someone's reading my dream journal. That's incredible. It's so exciting. The author of the Eisner-nominated miniseries Destiny, A Chronicle of Deaths Foretold. Your novels have appeared in the New York Times New and Noteworthy in Paperbacks list and the Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers program. You're coming off as a real slacker here, by the way. You have an MFA from Columbia University. You've taught writing at Fordham University and McDaniel and Manhattanville colleges. Your mother Ziva, which will become very important in a moment, she wrote nonfiction for Miss Magazine, Cosmopolitan, and the New York Times. Your father is Robert Sheckley, the author of The 10th Victim, which was made into an incredible, phenomenal cult film, which is world-renowned and is considered a master of dark, funny science fiction. So you come from this like creative super family, yourself especially included. Before we get into Howl, I have to ask, is there a lot of pressure being in a family like that? Or is it just like playing jazz? Like everybody just kind of finds their own way and has their own rhythm? What's it like?
Well, okay, so I grew up in the 70s, into the 80s on the Upper West Side, back when the Upper West Side was considered a little gritty.
Yeah.
And I had friends who were not supposed to go see me because I lived above 96th Street. This obviously seems like ancient history now. But I was raised by my mother. We were Gilmore Girls-ish.
Okay.
And my father, he went off to Europe and had another family. And it's funny, I just actually had lunch with my half sister Anya. So he has other kids. We were all raised pretty separately. How can I put this? So my father left behind his books and also the books of his contemporaries,
okay,
and the books that formed him, and also a 1947 Martin guitar. These objects helped raise me along with my mom. So this was also a time before there was, YA, and I, like a lot of people who are avid readers, I just started reading stuff that appealed to me. So I was reading absurdist short science fiction, from, God, I don't know, maybe age 8 or 9.
Okay.
So I wasn't raised by my mother and father. I was raised by my mother and my father's bookshelf. There came a point where I think that I introduced books to her as well as she to me. I certainly introduced her to comics. When I started to work at DC Comics in the 90s, she said to me something like, well, eventually you'll get a real job in publishing. And I said, no, you don't understand. Comics today are what SF was like in the 50s and 60s, where, people thought it was just pap and escapist and crass, but really it's where the intellectually heady stuff is going on.
Yeah.
And the minute I said that to her, she said, oh, okay. And after that, she was just, my daughter works in comics.
How great is that, though, that there was no pushback and no, like, we'll prove it. It was just, oh, okay, you're enlightening me. That's fantastic. I love hearing that. I love hearing that.
She never threw out my comic book collection. I don't know anyone else. You know, we lived in an apartment. There wasn't a ton of storage space. And just over the years, she would say, can you cull? Can you cull your collection? And I did, but I never got rid of my favorite issues of things. And so I have them still. They are worth nothing. They are falling apart.
But they're priceless.
Yeah.
They are. I have 10 boxes in the next room over, and I think the same exact way. You shrink them.
Very favorites. I got,
Let me see. Oh, come on. Come on, Alisa. Are you kidding me? Oh, I wish I had a box right in front of me now. We could compare.
Yeah, I got, oh God, what else oh.
Now this is speaking my language. I have been cherry picking cover images because I'm playing around with graphic design for Macabre Daily, and I've been cherry picking images of, DC Weird War and the Marvel. Oh, please. Sorry. But come on, you worked for DC. You had the crypt right there that you could pick from.
Unfortunately, so I moved a bunch of times, and in one of the moves, I ended up letting go of I really wish I'd held on to my comics. So when I was working as an editor at DC Comics, we would get not only our own, but also Marvel comics. And I had so much wonderful stuff. So I didn't hold on to it. And I regret.
You're the DC legacy, because Macabre Daily, we're all about horror, but all facets of horror and sci-fi. But DC has such a rich legacy with The Witching Hour and my House of Mystery.
Oh, okay. So this is
Unexplained.
Yes. Okay. So wait, I have to say, so with The Witching Hour, I loved it so much. I was still working as an editor, and I got James Robinson. That was the project that I chose, that I really wanted to do. And I ended up leaving, and we tried to co-write. We couldn't quite, collaboration is a complex thing. But yeah, so those are some of my favorite characters. When I interviewed at it was just Karen Berger's weird stuff. It hadn't been named. The world was so new. Nothing had a name. It was all tohu and bohu and a cauldron of strange, British fantasy writers. But anyway, so I go to this interview, and I hadn't done any due diligence. And they said, what are your favorite comics? And I said, it's stuff you don't publish anymore. It's House of Mystery and House of Secrets. And they said, yeah, you should talk to Karen Berger.
And she loved it. Oh, and then the rest is history. That's fantastic. Oh, I love that. Yeah, those comics, I still have some issues, but they're time machines. When I touch them, when I smell them, I'm transported back to my childhood, and I can hear the rain hitting the roof. The nostalgia is just crazy. It's just crazy.
And
it's probably all
like
made
the
up.
Bernie Wrightson sort of saliva gelatinously oozing. So I'm sorry. I've had interviews where I sound like an adult with coherent thoughts, and this is clearly not going to be one of them.
No, I probably bring a lot of that to the table. Guilty, but nothing is better than lying on your belly on a shag carpet with your comics strewn around you, and you're just transported to another world for however long. I love it. I love everything about it. But we have to talk Howl.
Yes.
You have now become one of my favorite people, because I can just go down any avenue with you, and I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But I want to talk about Howl because it's important. It just launched yesterday, which was the 15th. The cover, it's so funny that your mom turned you on to pulp, because when I read that first issue, that's what I saw, especially the cover. So Mauricet, I'm pronouncing it right now.
Yes.
Mauricet, that image of just everything that's happening in that image. Please,
so
yes.
Are there some people I should describe? So in Mauricet is both the interior artist, and he's been a collaborator of mine on Guilt. And we've been hatching ideas together for about a decade now. So in this image, we have the protagonist Ziva, who's a young woman. She's wearing a man's shirt and she's looking forlorn in a chair, while we see, a male character looking over his shoulder at her. He's about to leave, and he's wearing a full-on, jetpack
Yeah, he's
spacesuit,
wearing the gear.
but carrying a 1950s suitcase. And so that's, and wait till you see the other covers, which get even loopier. There's also a variant cover. I don't know if you've seen the variant cover for one. There'll be other variant covers too, but this is the variant cover in which we see a character we haven't discussed yet. She's the main antagonist, and she's sitting there having her tentacle cocktail while eyeball tentacled protrusions hang on her every word.
Dr. Morell, and I love the last name, by the way. Absolutely love it. So let's start macro and then we'll go to micro. So I want to start with just the fact of, okay, the collaboration between you and Mauricet. You've worked on Guilt. You have a great relationship. It produces, I'm not shy to say, phenomenal work. What was the spark that set you in the direction of sci-fi set during the 50s, sci-fi set during the 50s with location in Greenwich Village and everything that bubbles to the top in that cauldron? Because there's a lot there. There's a lot there to choose from. It's a rich tapestry. Let me just put it that way. So how'd you land on it?
So this formed in layers. So first of all, for years and years, I remember saying, I've had different literary agents over the years and saying, I'd like to write a novel based on my parents living in Greenwich Village in the 50s. And I think I was told, no one's going to have any particular interest in that.
They always say stuff like that.
So I let that go for a long time. And then I think this was around 2017, 2018. As I say, my mother has been my mentor, my best friend, and she was in her 80s when I began to see some signs of, memory loss and just subtle changes. And actually the funny thing is, we'll talk about, there's so many different ways to tell this story, but one way that I tell it is this. I became obsessed with the fact that she'd given away a menorah, a Hanukkah menorah that was done in this sort of brutalist mid-century modern beatnik, style. And she'd given it away, and I wanted it back. And then I began to think, what do I really want? And I thought, I want to know who my mother was in her 20s, living with my father in that world. I want to understand. Yeah. So I began to interview her. I'd always heard her stories, but for the first time, I could sense that time was passing and that I wouldn't always have this opportunity. And, meanwhile, Alan and I had been talking about what project, and I began to think, oh, maybe this could be a comic book project. But I was going back and forth. Prose or comics? Is it a straight out, historical story? Is it sort of a story within a story about a woman who wanted to be a writer and ended up sort of subsuming her goals into her partner's? And then I talked with Karen Berger. We were at a Comic-Con, and Karen just said, it should have science fiction in it. So that began me thinking along those lines. So, so here's this whole very serious, side to it. And what had to come in was the ridiculousness and the humor in order to become the concoction that it was. Because it's
very funny, though.
It's
really
equal parts, I think, extreme and humor. And so what changed is, see if I can say this right. So I had to get the idea for the antagonist. And so I knew that my mother and my father and their best friends, also writers, had all seen Mildred Newman. She was the author of a co-author of How to Be Your Own Best Friend and a bunch of like these seminal self-help. There was no self-help book, except for I think How to Win Friends and Influence People. But she was a psychotherapist who worked with Anthony Perkins and
Oh,
showed up at Hollywood things, and also with Richard Benjamin and Paula Prentice. I think Paula Prentice came first. She worked with the directors Mike Nichols and Paul Simon. And then I met someone else on the Upper West Side whose father was an abstract expressionist painter. And Mildred was seeing their parents and getting paid in paintings. And I'm, beginning to read up on her and thinking, this is strange. Why was this one person? She appears in Hollywood openings. She's all over the place. So then I thought, do I want to write a nonfiction book about this? This is nuts. And I think it was a few years ago. And suddenly I thought, wait a minute. What if the antagonist is this alien queen who has decided that the reason she's going to go after the intelligentsia and the creative types in the village is this is the key to taking over the United States, and that's the key to taking over all of humanity.
I love it. What a fascinating figure, though. I don't know if it's nefarious means, but what a fascinating figure. I know it's nefarious in Howl for sure, but it's still, like I said, there's a lot of humor on the page. Visually and in the writing. All right. So we've discussed, I love the fact that you landed, that all of a sudden you had that epiphany of like, yeah, this person is fascinating, but if we layer that through a sci-fi lens, now we're onto something. And you absolutely are onto something. Okay. So that's the inspiration for the character and the heart of the story. I know we have shades of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, of course, and The Thing. What other cinematic inspirations or written? It doesn't have to be movies.
There's So there are a bunch of movie inspirations in here. So first of all, what I try to do when I'm dealing with horror is I kind of think, what is this really about? Underneath it, like I need to know for myself, what is the story underneath the horror?
Mm-hmm.
And I think pod people, the idea that that the people we know are not the people we know is it's paranoid, but it's also a sort of existential dread of, do I know you? Can I predict who you are or what you will do?
Yeah.
And in the book, the Myrtle Morell, the therapist, has a book, You Are Not You, and everyone's very excited by You Are Not You. So I knew that was the underlying, DNA of it. And then I thought, okay, so I need to understand where the story is personally, and then I can play with all the tropes and know what they are, and then twist them. So first of all, I love John Carpenter's The Thing.
Same.
And the 1982 one. And I was hanging out with my editor and the publisher, AHOY publisher, Tom Peyer, and I had brought my British Film Institute analysis of The Thing. And it turned out I had to leave it with Tom because he's as huge a fan as I am. For your listeners and viewers who don't know, the thing was not a big success at the time. It was sort of reviled and thought it was horrible. But in retrospect, people are very appreciative of all of the subtleties of the horror of it. And the fact that Rob Bottin, who was, I think, 21 or something when he was doing the practical effects, was just, this amazing creative. No one had done the things he was trying to do, and he was just coming up with weird and dangerous stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and honestly, from a practical standpoint, Rick Baker and Rob Bottin, those things haven't been duplicated or they haven't been expanded on. That's it. In 82, that's like the pinnacle. I mean, it's unbelievable.
There is a sort of ode to him as well in the Poker Face series that I saw, but that's an aside. So that was in there. But the other thing which I love, and not everybody knows, is John Carpenter also did Starman, which is a completely different take on the shape-shifting alien. in this case, a rather romantic one where, Karen Allen plays this young widow who finds an alien has taken on, used the DNA of her dead husband to form a body so that he can do his stuff on Earth. And at first she's appalled, and then they form this relationship. So I kind of thought, ooh, what if I could cross the Thing and Starman and kind of see where they meet? But in addition, I mean, I thought about the return of Martin Guerre.
Okay.
And the whole idea of, someone goes away for a while and comes back and they are different, but maybe you like this new version of them better. So
Yeah.
there's that in the DNA. And then there's, the great Roger Corman movie Bucket of Blood about.
When I read that, I was like, Walter Paisley, are you kidding me? I love it.
Well, I mean, Bucket of Blood is a film that if anyone hasn't seen it, it's just, you look at it and think like, oh gosh, to have your first puppy again,
It's such a great ode to Roger Corman and Dick Miller. And I can see the Walter Paisley and Bucket of Blood of it all on the pages. It comes through. It absolutely comes through. Let's talk about misconception for a moment, because you wrote something that really resonated with me. And that is that, people have rose-colored glasses when they look back on that time period.
Yeah.
The Village wasn't like that. The Village is where you went if you were different. The Village is where you went if you wanted to be creative and unencumbered by judgment, or tried to. I should say tried to. It was a real reflection of what was actually happening in the country at that time. We look back on that now, and people just they just want to believe that everything was with this idyllic watercolor where the reality seeps into the paper, so all the rough edges are gone and you just get this wash of what it was, which isn't real. So when I read that, I was like, yeah, the Village. I came into the Village I went to NYU, and that was the early 90s. So there were ghosts of the Village, but it wasn't the Village, but there were echoes and there were ghosts of it, which was enough, But, it was this, I won't say safe haven because that's naive, but it was this enclave of free thought and creativity. But there was a lot of forces pushing back on that at every moment. So it does lend itself to this very interesting setting that you're creating your story in. How much of that hotbed influences the story? Because I've only read the first issue, so I did no spoilers, but it really is. It's such an amazing place to set this tale in, specifically for where I think you're going.
I will say that there is one other location in the story. So one of the recurring characters in this are Ziva's parents, mainly her mother, Bubba. Mm-hmm. And Bubba comes in, and, Bubba lives in Miami with her husband, but in the summers they go to a big Catskills, mainly Jewish hotel of the kind that people might know now from Dirty Dancing.
Alisa, is that, I was going to ask you, you name check the place that they're going to in the Catskills. Is that the one from Dirty Dancing?
It's not exact. So I myself, as a kid, went to both Grossinger's and the Concord, which were the.
Now I went to the Novelist, so we were there, but we were.
I could still do a lanyard.
You're on.
And yeah, so I really wanted to, and you'll see, like they're the kid. That's when the shit hits the fan, as it were. I really wanted. I thought about where I wanted the big showdown to happen.
Okay, you're
and
set.
I just really loved the idea of having it be in that big hotel, and it just felt. I mean, this is also. I have to say that Jewishness permeates my New York. So this is, the other side of this story. I've, is the Mrs. Maiselness of it. And so this, I think that I've always said, as someone who grew up in New York City, there are many different New York cities, and people tend to pull out the New York City that I have one friend who would always go to New York, and crazy people would be aggressive to her. That was just her New York. I don't know what her New York karma was, but this was always happening to her.
It was the lighthouse for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just want to say also that I'm trying to recreate a New York that was also from before my birth. So I went into, we were talking about source material. I wanted to say two things, both about New York and about the recreating. So one of my big source materials were my mother and father's letters to each other and my mother's journals as well. So I didn't have, she'd already begun to lose some of her memory, and then she got aphasia with Alzheimer's. So I went back to her letters. Luckily, because I knew my mother, there was nothing I read in there that made me think, oh my God, but I really looked at how there was an interconnectedness, and people just met in person more. I think we think, oh, it's so quaint in TV shows when somebody, in Seinfeld, where people show up in people's apartments instead of calling, and you think that's such a conceit so that it's more visual. But the world really was like that. People didn't rely on the phone, and you certainly, people wrote letters differently, and they also gathered in person more. So I think it had already begun to change by the 90s, but I'm trying to reconstruct that earlier way of, you didn't socialize as much in restaurants because these were bohemian types without a ton of money. They got together in people's houses.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, for me, that's more fun anyway. It's more intimate. I love that. Now, the number one series that I will be following. So I'll be waiting with bated breath for each and every issue. I knew that there were variant covers, but that variant cover is just gorgeous. And that's taking nothing away from Mauricet. The interior artwork, his cover illustration, and they're fantastic.
So I want to also add that inside, one of the things that Mauricet and I always want to call him Alan, are wanted to do was have odes to the old pulp covers.
We have 5 minutes left, so I just want to ask a couple more questions. Okay, this is personal to Macabre Daily. So I read that you can't take horror full on, that you have to temper it a little bit, almost like with a chaser. Why is that?
Oh, I think because, well, it's funny. So the genres I've always loved, I love romance and what they now call uplit, and I love horror. And there are traditions in horror, often horror that's aimed at children, where the moral universe tends to be reasserted by the end. And that is the horror that I can handle. I think that utterly bleak horror, it is not, I can handle a lot of grossness. You give me putrefaction, ooze, it can defy every law of, humans and nature. I'll be fine with it, as long as the beloved point of view character who's been growing, doesn't get punished for no good reason.
Yeah, they make it out by the end.
And so I think it's both humor and a little bit of a moral universe that allow me to enjoy my horror fully.
All right.
And I love, in particular, I'm a huge fan of Grady Hendrix and Paperbacks from Hell and all his novels. Oh, yeah. But I think Animals Go Bad, in particular, if you show me a movie about killer lampreys, and I am just happy.
Oh, you were going to be so happy with next month. We have Nature Runs Amok at Macabre Daily. all the great nature run amok movies. We're going to be doing articles on them. You've got the next 2 months with Macabre Daily are set for you.
Excellent.
Absolutely. Well, I want to tell all of our listeners and all of our readers, please go out and purchase Howl. Get both issues, please. Get the variant cover and the standard cover. You won't regret it. The story is fascinating and it's fun. It's engaging. The art is beautiful. I didn't spend enough time on this, and shame on me, but I love the pulp quality to it. I really do. You know, pulp is I adore it. And I can see it in the panels, and I can especially see it on that beautiful cover, the standard cover. You see the pulp quality to it, and it just sings to me. So everybody, go out there, purchase Howl. Alisa, this has been such a joy. I'm absolutely going to have you back on to discuss disaster movies. So listeners and viewers, you haven't seen the last of this incredible talent.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And now with more pulp.
Yes, I love it. With more pulp. Pulp's good for you. Take care. We'll talk soon.
Excellent. Bye.